Hey, hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is The Other Thing I Do. My guest this week is Jennifer Abbott, a documentary filmmaker whose credits include Us and Them, which she co-directed with Crystal Loughton, I Am, which she produced and edited, and 2003's The Corporation, which she co-directed with Mark Akbar. She has two films streaming in this year's Planet in Focus Film Festival, The Magnitude of All Things, and The New Corporation, the unfortunately necessary sequel, which she co-directed with Joel Bakken. They'll both be available to watch at the festival's site, planetinfocus.org, tomorrow, Wednesday, October 14th. Jennifer picked They Live, John Carpenter's 1988 sci-fi masterwork starring Roddy Piper as a construction worker who discovers the human race has been colonized by alien capitalists, and that he's the newest member of the human resistance. A rock-solid thriller that's also a brilliant subversion of the Reagan Revolution, with a fantastic supporting turn from Keith David as another working-class hero drawn into the conflict literally by force. They Live is a work of crack genius, and one that we really need right now. This is Someone Else's Movie.
Well, it seemed quite appropriate in these times to talk about a zombie apocalypse movie whose plot sort of identifies Reaganomics as the primary antagonist, and vast wealth inequalities and surveillance and control of society. And anyway, I thought it would be a little bit cathartic because, these are such bleak times, most of us feel, and it's really hard to figure out, the mental state or even the motive, it's very difficult to really tap into, especially American politicians right now. And so I thought it would be kind of cathartic that we look at this film that identifies very clearly these zombies as the bad guy, and kind of almost a relief that it's so simple.
Yeah, that's actually fair. I was going to say my experience of it was that I saw it on the opening weekend, the weekend before the election in 1988, and at the Eaton Center in Toronto.
Oh, wow.
A shoebox theater in the middle of a shopping mall, and I could not have asked for a more perfect experience of it. My friends and I just walked out bouncing and prepared to do, I don't know, some punk violence that we never actually did because we were suburban kids from Toronto. But it was one of those moments where you just feel the film grab the moment by the neck and just shake it in front of you for 90 minutes. And yeah, you're right. Hasn't lost a step. It's so damn relevant. It's so depressing. 32 years later, we've learned nothing.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost as it's prophetic in a Dr. Seuss-like way, really. Because
that's an excellent way to put it.
It's all of the B movie tropes and long fight scenes, and I mean it's quite a cheesy film in many ways, but it's quite the characters are quite adorable, even though it's so cheesy.
Oh yeah, very much
and,
so.
It's, I don't know, I just really, as soon as you asked this question, it was either going to be They Live or The Truman Show.
Okay.
Or a Thomas Vinterberg, which would have been much more serious. So I think that we all kind of need a bit of an opportunity to laugh and a bit of catharsis right now. And anyway, I watched it again last night, and I wasn't disappointed. I hadn't seen it for a long time, many decades.
Yeah. I revisit it far more often than I think I should. It's just one of those things where every time I expect I'm going to see that it's dated or tropey or something even sillier has happened. And it doesn't do that. The more I think about it, it might actually be, if it wasn't for Big Trouble in Little China, which I love to all, exclusion of everything else, and Halloween, which is pretty much a perfect movie, I would kind of point to it and say that it's Carpenter's best film. It is certainly most intellectually coherent work. Maybe it picks up on Escape from New York and the anti-authoritarianism there, but just the fact that it's a ground level look at an alien invasion that's already happened, that's a fait accompli, that's been working for 30 odd years. I think it's 1958, I think is the date they throw around, but it might even be earlier than that when they first arrived. And that, the world is really black and white and they colorized us. And that was a joke in 1980s Hollywood because of colorization. Now it's just like, yeah, of course they would. It just makes perfect sense. It's not even a joke anymore. It's so perfectly engineered to deliver its message. And also it's a Western about the sheriff that comes into town and stands up against everybody else, which has always been, Carpenter's wheelhouse. And also it's a science fiction film. And also it's a comedy kind of absurdity.
Well, yeah, like I'm here to chew bubble gum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubble gum. So
Yeah.
it's a comedy of sorts for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it captures something about Roddy Piper that no one ever else got either. I mean, I was
Yeah,
not
I
a
think
big wrestling
so.
fan, but he's delightful.
He is delightful. He is delightful. And he's very imperfect as well, of course. And the fight scene, of course, is quite
Sure.
I to tell you, I was a little bit bored by the fight scene this time around. It lasts 6 minutes. Apparently it was at one point in the Guinness World Book of Records for the longest movie fight scene.
I wouldn't be surprised.
What I found so funny about the fight scene was when Nada, the character, smashes the window of Frank's car. It's at that moment he apologizes.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like doesn't apologize for like almost killing him.
No, it's property damage, right? It's the one thing that actually counts in this world is that you have to have stuff. And these are two people who don't have anything, who exist on the lower economic tier. John is not as a skilled itinerant worker, but he is itinerant. He goes where the work is, which amazingly enough now is the theme of Chloe Zhao's Nomadland.
That's right. I have to see that. Yeah,
it just it feels like this thing, other than cell phones and occasional hairstyles, this thing could have been made tomorrow. Someone is probably
even
working
drones.
on one. Yes, that's right.
There's drones. Yeah, I mean, although I have to say, for me, in terms of, if we speak of because I feel it is sort of a cathartic film to watch right now, because it's like everybody looks at well, I won't say everybody, I'll say when I look at Mitch McConnell, he resembles more one of those aliens than a human being. And so I have to say that the fact that Nada and Frank spend so much energy fighting themselves, right? As opposed to fighting the aliens, is like, oh, come on, guys. It's just a little bit, come on. So that was something that struck me yesterday as well. And just in terms of a comment on what's going on as well with all of us who should be allies constantly.
Yeah. Well, no, the aliens have figured that out, right? They they offer their status to the squabblers. They pull people in by appealing to them. And again, of course, it's late capitalism with legs. It's just legs and a ghoulish face. Actually, that was the other thing I was going to say. It's technically not a zombie movie. This is me being a nerd, but Carpenter referred to them as ghouls in 1988. Right. And we're recording this the day after Stephen Miller was diagnosed with coronavirus. And the joke on Twitter is, I didn't know it could infect ghouls. It's like, I didn't even need that connection to form. It was there for me. Right. But it's not a predictive film because everything it's talking about was already happening. But it does feel as though this very specific type of right-wing fundamentalist capitalism, death culture-y that's been built up around Donald Trump specifically, that he inherited when he became the nominee in 2016. He stoked it for 4 years. It does feel like this is that. Like, it feels that this film is very much about a leader who we never see. We never, we're just a franchise to the aliens. They've shown up and taken over, and they're going to move on to the next thing when they get whatever they want from us. But the machinery is what's important, and that's the thing that is resisted in the film, not an individual. They never put a face on it, which I find really interesting in Carpenter's perspective, because he almost always does give you a villain. There's an entity to be opposed, and here it's the whole system.
It's the system, which I mean, for me, like all of my films, they in much more subtle ways than They Live.
Well, you make
Yeah,
documentaries. You're restricted in
yeah,
some level.
yeah. Well, you'd hope it would be more subtle because you can't get it more overt than They Live, but tries to make the familiar strange, right? Like tries to take social custom and shed new light on it and have audience members look at things differently than they did before. And so,
Right.
like for me, They Live was very satisfying just because it was just so in your face with making the familiar strange, right? Like the world, I'm really interested and captivated by this idea that the world is not what we think it is.
Mhm.
And of course, with They Live, they reveal this whole underlayer to quote unquote reality that most people can't see. And in so doing, the system becomes the antagonist, right? And
Yeah.
injustice becomes like, and the injustices of the system and the way the system is rigged becomes the injustice. And I feel that's just so that thread is so important for what we're, as we try and navigate this post-truth world and still aspire to the project of truth, like still try and figure out what truth is. Like I find it really, really interesting, the various approaches to try and figure all of this out in today's world. It's very mystifying. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the new corporation takes the approach of an instructional video, basically, to walk us through the ways that we're basically screwed. And the magnitude of all things is much more, I think, emotionally argued. It in a very literal way. You're trying to build a bridge between the personal and the global loss and
Mhm.
suffering that's been going on. But I guess the advantage of a documentary is that you can treat your audience as intelligent individuals and just assume
Mhm.
they've already sat down to learn or to be educated or illuminated. And you don't have to slip stuff in. You can be much more direct. Whereas a movie like They Live is all metaphor all the time. It's just that now the
Mhm.
metaphor is so obvious that you like it feels almost literal at this point.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's interesting because like when you say there's with documentary people, I think that there's more of a demand with documentary than, or than it for it just to, I'm not suggesting you're saying it should only be instructional,
Sure.
but it feels to me very much like there's been a real shift, which I appreciate, as a filmmaker in terms of making documentaries. And that, like, I have really high standards for the films I make, in the sense that I want them to be as engaging and as emotionally powerful, of course, as feature films.
Sure.
But yeah, I think that this film is just so completely out there, and that's a bit of a relief too. It's so like lacking in any embarrassment too, right? Like, and yeah, I think it's refreshing right now. I don't know. When was the last time that you watched it?
They Live?
Yeah.
I'm gonna guess about a year ago, I think.
Oh, okay.
It's pretty
Okay. And
fresh in
how
my
did you
mind.
feel then? Yeah, but how did you feel like at that point, like in terms of a year ago? Like,
I thought that it was one of those moments where I thought I owed Carpenter not an apology because I've always loved the movie, but that I'd underestimated it. It's,
okay, yeah. I
you
felt
know,
that way too last night, actually.
yeah,
Yeah, when I watched it again. Yeah,
he's,
I do.
he's technically proficient. He's always
Yeah.
been, he's always known exactly where to put the camera, always known how to cut in widescreen. He's always surrounded himself with people who are just enable whatever the gift is that he has. And then after, actually, this was probably his last really great movie. And then Memoirs of
Yeah.
Invisible Men and Vampires and that slide that happened with Ghosts of Mars and a few other films where he was just kind of plugging away and making movies. But whatever the spark was that animated that incredible run he had from Assault on Precinct 13 in 76 through to They Live in 88, that seems to have been the window.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I
And
think I mean, for me, They Live is unquestionably my favorite of his, but probably it's because I gravitate towards those issues, right?
sure, yeah.
Anything that takes down Reaganomics or sort of attacks consumption, and that our neoliberal system is going to be appealing to me. So, as you might imagine,
I'm on board as well. Yeah. So when
Yeah.
did you first encounter it? Did you see it at the time or catch up to it later?
No, I didn't see it at the time. I'm not even sure. I've definitely seen it a few times. I believe it was like friends of mine had a They Live party. I sort of half remember, and it wouldn't have been when it first came out. Yeah. So it was just a little They Live party, I believe, the first time. Yeah.
That's wonderful. How many people were there?
Yeah. Oh, it was just, and actually, I could date it because, as I recall, they had just had a baby, and that baby is now 20. So there you go.
Okay.
So there were probably only about 6 people there. It was just a small little, but it would have been about 20 years ago.
Okay. It was already, I'm trying to figure out if it was already out in widescreen, because for a decade it was only available in pan and scan, and that was just, unless you were lucky enough to get a Laserdisc, it was just unwatchable.
Okay.
Because the compositions, of course, are so gorgeous in scope.
Yeah, they really are. Yeah, I think so too.
And I remember trying to watch the fight in pan and scan, and the camera electronically whips from one side to the other. It's artificial and phony, and it just destroys the rhythms of it. But yeah, I love the idea that it was just out there, kind of overlooked. It didn't do terribly well theatrically. I think it was actually the end of Carpenter's deal with Universal. He'd set up this little low budget thing after Big Trouble bombed, sadly. I still don't understand how that happened. I mean, I do. The world is cruel. But his next 2 films were Prince of Darkness and They Live, and they were made for Universal for no money at all. And he wrote them under pseudonyms. Like, everything about them is sort of quietly disreputable. And I think that's also the only way a movie like They Live got made. If you had the studio involved in a larger budget and more people paying attention, I don't think it ever would have come out the way it did. And then it just rattled around in the pop culture zeitgeist, or not even the zeitgeist, it rattled around in the subconscious for a good 10 years.
Do you know when it peaked when it gained cult status? I don't know that.
I think it would have had to be around the time that the fight was parodied in South Park.
Oh, yeah.
There's a South Park episode that restages it almost shot for shot, and in the same length of time. It's brilliant, honestly. The episode, I think, is called Cripple Fight, and it is offensive in so many other ways. But it's the 2 physically challenged characters, Timmy and Jimmy, I think. It's been at least 20 years since I've seen this. But they just throw down in an alley, and it is the fight from They Live. Except for putting on the glasses. There's some other reason that they're fighting. But it takes 3 or 4 minutes to click that that's what's going on. And when it does, you feel the world around you just get a little bit brighter. Not just because it's such a clever appropriation of the moment, but because someone loved They Live besides me. It was just that sense that I wasn't completely alone.
I'm glad you like They Live. I love They Live.
I love it.
Yeah.
You would think it would be some kind of, I guess it was, right? The Shepard Fairey posters, the Obey movement that came out in punk design. It's out there.
Yeah,
it's
they
simmering.
made a lot of money with.
Yeah, probably more than Carpenter ever did.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I like to work with a lot of archival footage, right, in my films, and I did ingest They Live when we were experimenting, and we considered using clips of it in The New Corporation. Oh, yeah. Obviously, it didn't make it in, and in fact, very little archival made it in. It's just a different film than the first one, but it's one I could see playing with at some point for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I keep thinking there's this test I run every now and then of how could you remake something like this? Would it even be possible? And maybe, yes, in this case, I think you could absolutely do another version of this. It just wouldn't be as, it wouldn't feel as bold or original because They Live already exists. But if you were trying to remake it, you'd have to incorporate social media. You'd have to incorporate, surveillance and all the other things that exist now that didn't in 1988. And in a way that makes the movie more powerful because of those restrictions, because it sees everything coming.
Well, a remake with cloaked contemporary characters from the U.S. administration would. I think that would be fun.
You could
Yeah,
probably pull that off.
I think so.
There was a television
Yeah.
series a couple of years ago called Brain Dead, I think, that
Oh, okay.
posited an infection of parasitic worms
Okay.
driving Republican trutherism and fanaticism. But I think They Live actually comes up with a more disturbing idea, which is that we just get tempted. People just get bought.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
voluntary sacrifice.
Yeah. Well, I think there's that, and then there's also, of course, that we're asleep and that we get lulled to sleep very easily,
Mhm.
right? We get seduced by fancy images and lulled to sleep, and that's a really strong message too for me in terms of waking up and what does that mean? And yeah.
Yeah. It comes up in The Corporation a few times as well, doesn't it? The idea that we're all being seduced by
Yeah.
distraction, I suppose, is what I'd say.
Yeah, well, I think it does come up. It definitely, Chris Hedges references it, and that we're sort of obviously entranced by ourselves, really, right?
Yeah.
In term and that corporate culture is so focused on us and competition and not looking out for number one, that and consumption. So we absolutely we do look at that a little bit. Yeah. You
Yeah.
can't not yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's so embodied in Trump as well, just from his ascent through The Apprentice, right? He was selling
Yeah.
aspiration, and the thing that I still see now when these people defend him on Twitter and try to rationalize, he's beating the coronavirus by fighting it personally.
Yeah.
That was an argument someone was making 2 days ago, and all I could think of is, you think you'll be the one who gets to be his friend? They'll be the one person he keeps. Where,
Mm.
for 50 years, all he's done is throw people under the bus, whichever bus
Yeah.
was available to him. He destroys
Yeah.
everyone and everything.
Yeah.
And here we have, like in They Live, there's the Buck Flower character who shows, like the hobo who's
Yeah.
been kicked back, like a literal hobo, not to be defamatory or insulting in that, by using that term. He is portrayed as a guy who would be boiling a shoe in a pot if he had one.
Yeah.
And then by the end of it, he's unreconstructed, but wearing a tuxedo. He's still just as vile as he was, but
Yeah.
now he has a nice watch and a good suit, and he's blended right in. And he doesn't
Yeah.
care that they're using him, that it's so clear that they have no regard for him. He's just
Yeah.
he's there to take what he can in the moment.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's it's a really revealing moment when I mean, I love that moment where they go down the portal. And that would be a handy watch to have.
Yeah.
But that scene in the dining room where the great leader is speaking, and the humans who have sold out are there, and they don't care, as you say, right? And I feel it's like, I guess for people that are observing not only American politics, but politics like in Brazil or Poland, or we could name many different countries, who are just, who it's just so baffling, how the things that are happening could be happening. I mean, it's not as if in this film complex answers are being given, but it is a very sort of explicit condemnation, if you will, really, of humanity in terms of our ability to be just completely betrayed by money. And there's some great lines about money too, right? It's just business. That's the Buck Flower line. And so I don't know. I guess it's I do like that scene where it always surprised me where they enter that space and they're not all of a sudden, like, they're just like walk around and nobody's like calling the watch in, and they're not being arrested somewhere. So anyway, that surprised me about that scene.
Yeah, I just assume it's because everyone else is so transfixed by what's happening on stage. It's like blundering into a multi-level marketing meeting in a hotel somewhere. You realize nobody's even looking at the door. They're all focused intently on what it is that they can use to win.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and it backdoors the rebellion a little bit in a nice, fun way that leads to a big, dumb climax that is ultimately a useless victory, I guess, because nothing's going to change. But it ends at exactly the right moment. It shouldn't work. That final montage of the ghouls all being revealed, it should not work, but it's so goofy and good-natured, I guess. It's like, we've just watched everyone lose everything. All of our heroes are dead. They've been betrayed. It's the one thing the movie doesn't really do enough with, which is the question of how many people in media are complicit. And it can't, right? Because Holly has to be the big reveal at the end. We can't know. But but the casting of Meg Foster in that role is just, there's something a little chilly about her. There's something a little too eager to help when it happens. And a bit, when I saw it with an audience that first night, people in the audience were like, "Aw!" You could actually feel their disappointment that she was a turncoat.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, those eyes, very unusual eyes. They sort of
icy blue.
They're icy. They're very. That's a very good way of putting it. So I was always quite distrustful of her. I don't know why, but I guess her eyes. I was like, whoa. That was actually I thought really good casting.
Yeah, it's great. No one who works in media can be trusted.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
And then we have.
Well, you said you found the ending really unsatisfying. Did you? Like,
the mechanics of that sequence are a little bit unsatisfying. He just shows up, gets to the roof, shoots the thing, is betrayed. It feels kind of small for the big global revolution that it kicks off.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
But then you get the revolution in really small bites as well, which I think saves it, because it is just so silly. And it's that thing that everybody complains about when they're watching movies with very limited scope, is that they, I wanted to see what the world is like outside the Matrix. Well, it's just kind of messy. At the end of Cube, we don't see the world of Cube. It's like, well, just be some people in offices. I don't know what you want from these things, really. They Live actually ends with a cataclysmic upending event. And the only way we can see it is by the 3 or 4 people in the room at a time, because that's all the film has the money for. But it's also really, really smart, because it makes it intimate. It makes it immediately relatable.
Yes, it does. I think I quite, and it's so simple, and it's so brief.
Yeah.
But I love the end. I think the end's great.
Yeah.
So it's
got that cheap shot at Siskel and Ebert, which is just so funny, and it shouldn't be, but it really, really is.
And then and then not giving the finger. It's great. And I don't know. I found the ending quite satisfying. But I see what you mean in terms of the actual build up to that moment.
Yeah, it's more the mechanics of getting there.
Sure.
It just feels, and it's part of the function of it is that they don't have a lot of money and that they don't have a lot of running time. Really, this thing is really efficient, and maybe that's it. After the way it luxuriates in the fight scene, or even just the whole first act, where we really do get a sense of the world that we are inhabiting, the parts of Los Angeles that we don't get to see, homeless camps and homeless encampments in a movie in 1988. Again, we have 10 cities now, but this is that. It's just, it's predicting this thing as well. And
apparently that's like a real homeless camp, and they were all paid a day's wages.
Yeah, I heard about that.
That's what
too.
I heard. Yeah,
they had to destroy something else in the scene where the police come in, because they didn't want to damage the real location.
Oh, that's nice to know. Yeah. And apparently the most expensive scene was that supermarket scene, because all of those labels had to be they were all actually
Nice.
Yeah. I don't even know what the budget was for the film. Do you?
I think it was pretty small. I remember it being, I don't want to guess at it, but I think it was something like 1.5 or 2 million. It was a lot smaller than it could have been. The nature of his deal with Universal was that it was almost nothing. I'm not even sure he was paid for the writing, which is why there's a pseudonym. It's possible it was just part of his fee. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Frank Armitage is the credited name.
Yeah.
Wait, no, I don't actually know. I don't know the significance of this one. I know the significance of the pseudonym he used on Prince of Darkness. He credited it to Martin Quatermass, which is a reference to the Nigel Neal Quatermass TV series and movies from the UK, which are very, very similar to Prince of Darkness. But
Okay.
yeah, and it's possible that Nigel Neal also developed the story with him. They're sort of competing stories about that. They Live is
Okay.
credited to just a generic name, as far as I know.
To Frank
Frank
Armitage.
Armitage, who is
Yeah.
John Carpenter.
Yeah. Yeah. And Joe Carpenter is also the composer here.
Oh, always, yeah.
Yeah.
He did the music
Amazing.
for everything right through to, I think, with the exception of The Thing, he wrote the music for everything he did up until, I'm going to say, Memoirs of an Invisible Man. So this might have
Oh, it's
actually been the last
amazing.
one.
Yeah.
And then he did it
Yeah.
again with Vampires. He's just, it's unlike most of his other music too. It's bluesy and weird and
Yeah.
slow. I just
Yeah.
listen to that on its own sometimes. I do love the soundtrack.
Oh, yeah, I love listening to soundtracks. I have to say, I play so many different roles in my films, but I never am the composer, sadly. I'd love to be able to be.
Yeah.
That'd be one thing I should take up.
Yeah,
An instrument. I'd love to play an instrument. I don't. So,
no, you could probably garage band it at this point. I mean, the technology is there
yeah,
for anybody.
yeah, that's true. But I mean, I'm just very impressed that he's also a composer.
Oh yeah.
Really.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
such a good one too. I mean, his instincts are amazing.
Yeah.
Just the score for Halloween is one of the most unnerving things in
Yeah.
the world.
It really, I remember seeing Halloween when it came out. Oh my God, that was, that freaked me out. That's for sure. I don't think I should have ever seen that film. Took me a while
It's a
to
perfect
recover
engine. It
from.
really is.
Yeah, yeah.
And he does, I mean, he does bring the same focus to bear here in that it moves like a shark. It just establishes and runs with its premise, constantly suggesting a larger world. We never really find out about the tech behind the glasses, or I mean, why would we? They're magic. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think in interviews, he actually identifies the ghouls, but sometimes get the ghouls as Republicans.
Yeah.
Right. And
Sure.
so that's also really, I wonder what he would say now. Actually, I would love to hear his take on Republicans now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I wonder if, the ghouls represent the Republicans and then the human ones are the Tea Party who joined on because they offered them the craziest ways to express their anger. And now it's QAnon and everything else.
Yeah, QAnon, I was just going to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, maybe that's the way in for a remake now. You'd have to deal with something like that. And it's, the only way I could see it working was if the QAnon people have become so radical that either the aliens no longer want anything to do with them and are sort of helping other people get rid of them. It's like clear the middleman out.
Yeah.
Or if QAnon's beliefs are the only ones that are true, but that's a function I don't really want to endorse somehow.
Yeah, well, the Proud Boys probably have a role to play in a contemporary version too.
Oh, yeah, they can be security. They can be their enforcers.
And actually, somehow weaving in COVID-19 seems appropriate. Yeah.
It does feel like we're in the combo platter stage of the extinction level event where there isn't just one thing. We can choose a whole bunch of different things to go terribly, terribly wrong. It's a complete systemic failure, right? That's what we're watching.
That's what we're watching. Yeah, the decline of the American empire. But there's also a reference, of course, that the ghouls were releasing various greenhouse gases into the atmosphere to warm the planet, right? There's also that if we're talking about various existential threats that are referenced. And it just feels like the culmination is here. And sometimes you just have to cry about it, and sometimes you have to laugh about it, and sometimes you have to, I don't tend to get that much pleasure from watching men shoot guns, but I have to admit, it was a little bit satisfying.
Yeah, take your catharsis where you can.
Take it where you can. That's right.
Yeah, and the New Corporation is ultimately a pandemic movie as well, in that you clearly got swerved out of your original lane because the documentary incorporates stuff that was shot after the fact, which I found really, it's powerful, but it's also really jarring because so few things are engaging with what's actually happening right now that people are talking about. The television series that we're watching are only beginning to reflect it because they're the things that were put into production in March and April once this started. But it was it was really shocking to suddenly see the timeline of your film, of your documentary, collide with real events in a way that you couldn't shoot around. All of a sudden, we're watching home video and Skype footage and cell phone shots, and people
Yeah.
phoning things in. The sound quality changes because they're not in a booth anymore.
Yeah, we had to open up picture lock, right? We were pretty well locked picture in, I'd say, about April.
Oh, wow.
And then maybe April, and Joel back in, the co-director and writer, we just felt really strongly that if we didn't include the pandemic, that the film would be out of date before it. And I think we were right too, because it's just so relevant. Pandemic laid bare the injustices of the system that we were trying to expose. And then it also showed us like our humanity, right? And we use it in that way too. And then also the link between the destruction of nature and these emerging diseases and zoonotic disease transfer. So we opened up picture lock to include it. Had to convince the producers. And then we actually opened up picture lock the second time, right? With the anti-racism uprising.
Oh, of course. Of course, that was after,
That we only did in 2 weeks, right? So that was a challenge. But again, it's not as if it's not a current events film, obviously. But those two events were just so monumental that to not include them would have been, they've transformed the film, including them. I feel anyway.
Oh yeah, and without it, it would have felt strangely naive, right? Because this other thing is coming, and you can't pretend it isn't there.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a great way to put it. It's true. Yeah.
And the idea of feeling the loss of the world that we used to live in while we're still living in it is something that runs through the end of the new corporation in a really subtle way, and it's much more, I think, front and center in the magnitude of all things, or at least that's how I interpreted it.
Yeah, the magnitude of all things is about, it is about our emotional and psychological relationship to the climate crisis, right? And as you say, we're living in this world that's changing all around us, and it's changing in a way that is a loss, right? Like, I'm in Vancouver, and we, for many of the last several weeks, have had air that's so polluted by the climate change fueled fires.
Oh, of course.
We can't go outside. We can't see across the street. You can't see the sun. If you do see the sun, it's this strange, beautiful, beautiful. The apocalypse is a beautiful, orange. So it's a real loss, and it's coming to terms with the changing world all around us. And so the magnitude of all things, we travel all over the world to the fire-stricken Australia and Great Barrier Reef and the Amazon rainforest and the Nunavut in northern Canada, and we talk to people on the climate front lines about how they're feeling, right? So absolutely, it's very much about how people are feeling.
And you personally, what's the toll been like on you to document all of this? I mean, you've been making the corporation really since what, 2002, 2001 when you started work on it, or even before that, right? To live with this for 20 years.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. I think I have a mixed relationship to that, because on the one hand, it is difficult to, and all my films are fairly difficult subject matter, and of course, I sink my heart and soul into the film. I don't really ever escape it completely over the years that each film is made. So it can take its toll without question. But on the other hand, I'm not a person that likes to dwell on the surface. Like, I like to really dive deep into things. And so, even though it's difficult on one level, it's also very kind of gratifying to feel like to feel like there's some deep reflection going on, and as a human being, that's sort of one of my projects, just to that I like to try and figure these things out and reflect deeply, and then use my skill set to sort of create some kind of reflection of that.
Yeah, that seems
Yeah.
constructive. I just sit there and mourn. It's not nearly as good.
Well, mourning is good. Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I mean, for me, I think it's important that we go towards that mourning, right? That we go towards our deepest fears and sorrows, whatever they may be, and not
Mm.
away from, because it's a lot of energy to keep those things at bay, and going towards them ultimately, I think, is more, not only healthy, but ultimately we grow more that way, and we become our best, I think, that way. And I mean, it's a real belief of mine that at this moment in time, we have to find ways to bring out humanity's best, because there's a lot of humanity's worst coming out in
Yeah.
lots of areas, right?
Yeah.
And we're heading for some difficult times, even more difficult than now. And if we don't bring out our best, then we're in even deeper trouble.
Yeah. And I used to think that all the alien invasion movies, even They Live in its way, are ultimately optimistic because they imply that if we can wake everybody up, we'll all be on the same side. And
Yes.
humanity will always unite against an existential or extraterrestrial threat. And then it turns out the virus comes along and people are arguing over whether they get to wear masks or not. We're not going to make
Yeah.
it, are we?
No, well, I think that's the thing that's cathartic to me about They Live, is that, the aliens are exposed for who they are or what they are, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's the ability to root them out, as you say, right? But that's, I think, what's so sad about the current situation. Not, I always keep going back to the States, just because you can't make that stuff up, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's like,
No, totally.
if it wasn't so tragic and so sad, it would be like, it is so interesting,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
and but it's not like, it's not as if they have been exposed, right? Like, what was that bus thing that Trump, I was sure during the election last time, and he was caught recording on the bus about assaulting women and bragging about it, right?
Yeah.
What was that scandal called? I
The
can't
Access
remember.
Hollywood scandal. Wasn't
Yeah,
that was
that's
4 years
right.
ago today, I think, if I'm
Oh, was
remembering
it?
correctly. I just saw
Oh,
either today or yesterday, I saw something floating around on social media. Of course I did. That this is when it happened.
okay. Well, there you go. Very, very topical for today then, because, there he is, he's revealed. I was like, oh, phew, he'll just never, this is it. He'll be rooted out now. Like, what self-respecting woman or person would vote for this person at this point, right? But that's, I think, what's
Yeah.
so depressing about it. Or Miller, who is the real life ghoul, right? Or McConnell, or, I mean, we can just keep going, of course.
Sure.
And they are all being revealed to be so morally corrupt. Like, it's sort of beyond, it's unfathomable, but they're not being rooted out, right? They're
No, they're
and
being
I think,
celebrated in their circles, right? Like that's the worse they are, the more they're embraced by people who feel, as best I can tell, people who feel they would do exactly the same thing if given the opportunity. They're avatars of
yeah,
strength for weak people.
yeah, God, that's a good way to put it.
Oh, it's probably not
It's
original
very
with me.
hard. It's very hard to it's really hard to figure out. So I think that's the difference with They Live, and why, it's just sort of a relief to travel that plot that is quite simple, and they're exposed, and then they're, and it's just not happening on the other side, right? So
Yeah.
it's true. I mean, Trump could literally shoot someone in the street, as he says himself, and that would be okay.
No, I'm sure there'd be a perfectly good reason. Someone on his side would come up with a good story.
Yeah.
And that would be that. Yeah. No, it does
Yeah.
make one despair. And again, it's why I love Carpenter and Universal putting this movie out on the weekend before an election. And there are people now who are planning to drop COVID documentaries 2 weeks before Adam Benzine has his film, The Curve, coming out on YouTube in the States 2 weeks beforehand in order to just win some hearts and minds. And I want to believe it'll help. I do. I want to, but I think the ghouls have a pretty good hold on those people, and I don't know that they're going to let go.
Yeah, I don't know either. We'll have to see. Some people have wanted to use the new corporation too before the election, so fingers crossed. Yeah, it's really a scary time. We're not sure which way it's going to go.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can listen back to this episode in 3 months and laugh at how silly we were to be scared because everything worked out fine. That'd be fine.
So what? Yeah, let's hope. Let's hope.
My thanks to Jennifer Abbott, whose films The Magnitude of All Things and The New Corporation, the unfortunately necessary sequel, are available to stream as of tomorrow, Wednesday, October 14th, at planetinfocus.org. Thanks also to Jennifer Mayer. She knows what she did. You can find Jennifer Abbott on Twitter at Corporation Film, all one word, and you can find They Live in a jam-packed Blu-ray special edition from Shout Factory, and there's a 4K release coming December 4th. It's also available on Apple TV and Google Play, and streaming in the US via Starz. And here's something I learned after the fact. Frank Armitage is the full name of Keith David's character in the movie. Go figure. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com, where I'm hosting a bunch of podcasts these days. Go check them out. And you can find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or wherever you've been enjoying us. Every little bit helps, it truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're at it. Stay inside, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out. I'll see you next time.